Hello there folks, welcome back to the Chap's Guide. My name is Ash and I am your host on this journey through men's style, self-development and personal grooming. Now today I am going to give you my review of something of a classic gentleman's book. It is You Only Live Twice, written by Ian Fleming. And of course it is one of the stories in the James Bond, the original James Bond storylines. And it's a book which I found rather interesting. But first, before I launch into the plot and tell you my views, there is some sort of background knowledge that it's useful to have when we're thinking about You Only Live Twice, just so we understand where it sits in the timeline of Bond books. Now, it is the 12th of the 13 Bond books, or the story books, which were written by Ian Fleming. I say story books because there were later books which were a combination of short stories. But You Only Live Twice was number 12. It was published in 1964. And it was the last Bond book which was published in the lifetime of author Ian Fleming. He died not long after this book was published. There was another book which came in the timeline afterwards, The Man with the Golden Gun, but that was posthumously published. He'd written it, mostly finished it before he died, but this was the last one which came out in his lifetime, in 1964, the 12th Bond book. And it has been described as not one of his best, it is fair to say that. There is quite a dark and melancholic style to this. It doesn't feel warm and cheery at all. And I put that down to the fact, and it's been credited to the fact, that at the time that Fleming was writing this book, he was nearing the end of his life. Even though he was only in his mid-50s, he knew he was dying. He smoked 2.5 packets of cigarettes and drank a bottle of gin a day during his lifetime. And that really shortened his life, and he knew that the end was near. He had been given no more than 5 years to live when he was writing this book, and it has really a somewhat depressive and melancholic view to it. Bond at the beginning was somewhat melancholic as well. So, that's where it comes from. It has been criticised as being more of a travel book than a spy story. And there is an element of truth to that also. But I did enjoy it. I'll give you that away at the beginning. But let me tell you a quick synopsis of the plot. So basically what we have here is a continuation of a story which really begins in the previous book on Her Majesty's Secret Service. Right? You've got to understand as well that the books are nothing like the movies. You Only Live Twice is absolutely nothing like the movie You Only Live Twice, which featured Sean Connery. It is totally divorced from that story entirely. However, in this book, Bond is just coming back from On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Now, on Her Majesty's Secret Service, the book, he encountered the villain Ernst Stavro Blofeld, who murdered his new wife, Teresa. And at the beginning of this book, it's 9 months after that event. So Bond is a widower, right? His wife was murdered. The villain escaped. Bond is depressed. He has fallen deeply into the sins of the flesh, drinking heavily, smoking heavily, probably enjoying recreational drugs as they were back in that time. He is late for work repeatedly. He is making errors in his employment as a spy. And his boss, M, is on the verge of sacking him, getting rid of him, letting him go. However, he has a psychological evaluation, and the psychiatrist suggests to M that the old Bond is still in there. He just needs exposure to a bit of excitement to bring him out again. So M decides to give him a second chance, and he sends him on a mission to Japan, a bit of a diplomatic mission initially, because they want to get some cooperation from the Japanese intelligence services, who have a decoding machine which they want to share with them. So Bond is dispatched on this mission, and he meets the head of the Japanese intelligence service, a man called Taiga Tanaka. And this is where they talk about it being a bit of a travel book. He goes on something of a journey with Bond through Japan. And the reason for this, most people hypothesize, is that Ian Fleming had gone to Japan on a bit of a literary tour in 1959, and he became a little fascinated by the Japanese lifestyle. Of course, many Westerners were divorced from the Eastern lifestyle generally. Many British people would never have gone there. So it was a new thing, and he decided to base his book in Japan. So he deeply went into the Japanese culture, and we see Taiga Tanaka taking Bond on something of a guided travel trip around Japan in much of the beginning of the book. Bond, in fact, faces no dangers, no risks. It's just him living the Japanese life of, drinking very, very heavily, enjoying the sins of the flesh with Japanese females, all under the tutorage of this Taiga Tanaka. He also meets an old friend called Henderson, Deco Henderson, and who's an Australian intelligence agent, and he goes out drinking with him and enjoying the best Chap's lifestyle of, the mid-early 1960s. It's quite a bizarre book, because I actually thought it was really slow. There's nothing happening. Until at the end, we understand what really is happening is that the Japanese intelligence services want Bond to do their dirty work for them, and if he does that, they will share information with him. And what they want is Bond to eliminate a domestic threat which is occurring in Japan. There is this villain who appears to have appeared just recently in Japan, and his name is Shatterhand, Dr. Shatterhand. He's a foreigner who's come into Japan. He's taken over an old castle which they call the Castle of Death, and he has allowed this castle to become something of a place where people go to commit voluntary suicide. He has set this place up. He's sort of designed this lake of death which is full of piranha fish, and he's got poisonous plants and snakes and things like this which are all roaming the grounds of this castle. And in Japanese culture there is quite a strong, it's referenced in the book, I can't tell if it's true, but quite a strong culture of, doing away with oneself if honour has been lost. And this Dr. Shatterhand kind of allows people to come to this suicide park which he has created to allow them to do away with themselves under sort of his permission, so to speak. And this has become a political embarrassment within Japan. So the Japanese intelligence service would like him to eliminate Dr. Shatterhand on their behalf because they can't be seen to do this. So Bond goes along and they place him under deep cover in a nearby fishing village with this group of Japanese people called the Ama. Now he is placed under the sort of direction of a young female called Kissy Suzuki, and she acts as his guide because she speaks good English. She's had a previous life in the West before returning to her people in the Ama tribe, and he goes out fishing with her every day, and they grow quite a close bond, the typical female love interest in any Bond story. However, this ends sadly to Kissy's wishes when Bond steals across to the castle and he infiltrates the Castle of Death, having had some ninja training under the arrangement of Taiga Tanaka. He goes into the castle, and I'm not going to spoil the story for you, but suffice to say, Dr. Shatterhand is discovered to be the old villain, Ernst Stavro Blofeld in disguise, who wanders around dressed eccentrically as a samurai warrior. He has become totally mad, and he's surrounded himself with henchmen and his own wife or girlfriend, female henchman anyway, Irma Bunt, who does his bidding for him. And they've set themselves up as lords of the manor in this Castle of Death, and Bond observes for a little while before taking any action. He finds the right moment. He goes to commit the act of assassination. However, he is captured, and as usual there is a period in which he has to overcome being a prisoner and ends up in hand-to-hand combat with Blofeld. And suffice to say, I'll spare you the details, but suffice to say, revenge is enacted by Bond in the most visceral manner in hand-to-hand combat. And Bond is badly injured in his escape. In fact, he suffers a brain injury, but he is rescued by Kissy Suzuki. And whilst he suffers total amnesia at the end, he lives with them, with the Amma tribe, as one of their own for quite some time. Everybody else believing that Bond is dead. In fact, his obituary is published in the Times. And in fact, it's a very interesting point because that obituary tells us more about Bond's background than has ever been revealed in any of the books before. So it's a kind of pivotal moment in the Bond storyline. It's a fascinating point. And that's the story, basically. There are some interesting parts to it. Clearly, in my view, Fleming, at this point, had a total gutful of writing Bond, and he was at a loss with what to do with him in this story. The story is long and slow and plodding initially, unless you're somebody who's deeply interested in Japanese lifestyle culture from the 1950s and 60s. But it takes forever until the action gets going. When it does, it's at the end, and it's up to our expectation. There's lots to think about. There's lots to enjoy. I did actually overall enjoy this book. I mean, some of it is somewhat bizarre. I mean, at the end where Bond is suffering from amnesia, interestingly, Kissy Suzuki, his girlfriend at this point, wants to elicit some amorous intentions from Bond, who is not showing any interest in the pleasures of the flesh. So there's this odd chapter where she goes over to mainland Japan and goes to a sex shop and elicits the counsel of the sex shop owner, who takes her into a back room, and as she witnesses, he electrocutes a toad to get this toad to sweat. He harvests the sweat from a toad, places it into a small vial, and Kissy is sent back to Bond, told that she needs to mix this up with his food to get him back interested in the act of lovemaking again, which she does. And it is really an odd section in here. I mean, it takes some believing to read it, but it's in there, sure enough. So it's a book which holds many surprises. I've told you much of the plot line here, but I haven't told you the real guts of it. And it is worth reading. And even though it is not one of the best Bond stories, to be honest, I would give it 3 stars out of 5. It's still something that you have to embrace as part of the Bond storyline. Well worth having a go if you want to complete your reading about Bond's journey. He's almost at the end of his journey in the original Bond stories here. There's only one more to go. But you only live twice. If you've seen the movie, forget it. Totally different. But I enjoyed it on the whole. So there we go. 3 stars out of 5 for me. Tell me if I'm wrong. Tell me if you thought differently. I hope you enjoyed this review. If you did, like the video, subscribe for more. Send me a question, drop me a comment, send me an email. I'd be delighted to hear from you. Support the channel by buying me a coffee or becoming a patron. Enjoy the extra videos I make just for my patrons. And I'll see you again very soon.